here today. Very excited to be talking to you guys about changing streets to change the world. And what I'm going to be giving you a sneak peek of, as was mentioned, was the new Global Street Design Guide, which we're going to be launching officially in 2 weeks in Quito in Habitat 3. The idea is that this sets a new baseline for designing streets that are safe and sustainable around the world. So, of course, we're here to talk about walking, right? But in cities, we can't talk about walking without talking about our streets. And so thinking about how our streets are designed to support a walkable environment. And I want to speak a little bit about how we can see the potential in our existing streets in transforming these spaces and restore the role of the street as the lifeblood of our communities. Now, many people in this room are going to know that our streets make up our largest continuous network of public space. And quite frankly, we've been doing a pretty rotten job at making efficient use of this valuable space. So we can talk about the lens, through many lenses about street design. Streets help us access our cities and help us move about. They help support environmental and economic sustainability, livability and quality of life. And the Global Guide touches on some of these aspects, the environmental sustainability, whether it's water management, dealing with noise, energy efficiency, or the economy of our streets, whether we're talking about work and productivity and the time wasted that people spend on them, our health and human lives, how they support our businesses, and the costs of construction and maintenance. Streets shape our human health and they shape our everyday human experiences, impacting our quality of life. But the lens that I want to focus on today is public health and safety. And this is because we were funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies through their initiative for global road safety to work on this project. And in 2014, Bloomberg committed $125 million to work on road safety. And that's part of the work we've been doing through the production of the Global Street Design Guide. How many people know this number? A lot of people in this room, right? We hear it a lot. 1.25 million people die every single day, every single year on our streets. But what we have to remind ourselves is the equivalent of that is one person every 30 seconds. That's somebody's mother, somebody's father, somebody's child, aunt. It means that when we finish just this session, 180 people are going to be dead on the streets around the world. This does not count the 1.34 million people who die prematurely from air pollution, large cause of which is transportation, and the 38 million who die from chronic disease, a large cause of which we all know in this room is physical inactivity, which our streets can facilitate. But the upside is that a lot of these deaths are actually preventable. And it's not rocket science. We know exactly what to do. We know that speed kills and that it's fundamental that we start to lower our speeds, both through legislation and through how we design our streets. If we look at the relationship of impact speed and the risk of fatality, we see that a vehicle moving at 30 kilometers an hour gives us a 20% chance of dying, but an 80% chance of survival. If that same vehicle is moving only 20 kilometers faster at 50 kilometers an hour, we now have an 80% chance of dying if we're hit by that vehicle. And as you'll see, once we go up past 80 kilometers an hour, the chances are pretty much certain. Secondly, we have to, it's pretty basic again, turn how we've been designing our streets and design our streets for people first. We have to stop creating environments that have forgotten that human beings are at the core of our cities. We've been designing spaces that don't even provide a space for pedestrians, where people have to risk their lives every single day to go to work, to go to school. We see environments like this in Bogota and Colombia, where our most vulnerable users, someone in a wheelchair, has to battle off with someone moving at high speeds with a huge amount of protected armor. This is ludicrous. We've been designing environments where we're invited to use it like a racing track. If I'm a driver on the street, I'm being encouraged to go as fast as possible. We can put all the enforcement, we can put all of the things that we want to slow people down, but if we don't change the physical environment, we're not going to get there. And we have to stop creating environments where someone has to walk 6 or 7 times as far just to cross the street. Imagine if you're carrying 5 bags of shopping. Imagine if you're grandma and walk at slow speeds, or if you're a 3-year-old child. Why on earth would you have to cross? Why do we do this? You have to walk up, zigzag, 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 up, across, zigzag, 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 down. That's just if you can take the stairs. If you're driving, all I need to do is twist my little ankle and I stop, right? So we've been doing this the wrong way. Even in New York City, our streets only 10 years ago looked like this. The wonderful thing is that there's examples all over the world we can look to, from Melbourne and Istanbul to the Czech Republic to streets like this in Helsinki in Finland. Spaces that invite us to use them. Recent transformations of intersections in São Paulo or tiny parklets in Lima. Examples like this one in Argentina that don't have to cost a lot of money. With a bit of paint and some planters, we can go and change the geometry and create a safer environment. Or this plaza in Mexico Square, where a piece of asphalt has been transformed into a space that brings communities together, gives them somewhere to sit and communicate with each other. Examples like the shared street in Auckland, where vehicles are allowed to use the space, but they are not the king. They are invited to use it at very slow speeds. And quite frankly, it's okay to have streets in our cities with no cars at all, like this one in Glasgow or Bandung in Indonesia, Madrid in Spain. And we're increasingly seeing great examples of new cycle infrastructure. I know this is a pedestrian-focused conference, and there's a lot of talk about peds versus bikes. What we do in this guide is trying to create an environment that's encompassing everybody, all of our most vulnerable users. Infrastructure in Lima, again in São Paulo, where we've seen 500% increase just in the last 3 years. And I love this slide because it's both Auckland and Addis Ababa, New Zealand and Ethiopia, both 2016, doing their first protected cycle infrastructures. Now they look and feel very different, but it's just to remind us that we're all going through this together at the same pace, and that we need to look to each other to understand the mistakes and to know how to do things. And as we talk about changing the chip, right, whether it's looking at the Seine River in Paris, where we've taken that space away from cars and given it to people, or efforts that temporarily take cars out of the city, like this one in Paris, seeing copied in São Paulo and Avenida Paulista. Bogota and Colombia has been doing this for a long time. They're now even talking about car-free hours so that kids can get to school and not have to spend hours of their day wasted on their streets. Cities like Dublin that are committing to be car-free in their city centres in 2017. And our poster child of cities, of livable cities like Copenhagen, where a third of the population bike and a third take public transit, where they have so many cyclists and they've got multiple lanes. They've got turning lanes for their cyclists. They've got e-bike share systems that allow people of all abilities to get around the city, and they're not stopping there, right? They're committing to be carbon neutral by 2025. And if we just remind ourselves that a lot of these streets used to look like this in Copenhagen, and today they look like this. Or in Amsterdam, streets like this, today look like this. There's a few cars, slow speeds, a lot of bikes. It's a street designed for people. Also in Amsterdam, large swaths of asphalt, transformed to add value to that community that they're in. Now these designs and transformations did not drop out of the sky. They didn't just appear one day when everybody woke up, right? They were design decisions that people like you guys in this room, people that were the practitioners, drawing the lines, making the political decisions to do things differently and to focus on multimodal transportation. So we have the precedents. We know what's possible. We are increasingly becoming aware of the urgency that our cities are growing, that our climates are changing, and the people are dying, and we know we've got a long way to go. So it's the work of people like you guys here today, your bold visions, your technical support, your advocacy, and your local leadership that is going to get us there. And part of what we've started doing with the Bloomberg Initiative for Global Road Safety is approaching this. Now, they work on enforcement and data and media, but our team's part of the Safe Streets group with WRI, Embark, who I believe are here today, and the World Bank's Global Road Safety Facility and the IRAP program. And so what we were doing at NACTO for the first year, well, it took a little longer than a year, but it was a giant project. The first year we were focusing on the global guide, and then starting in 2016, we've been doing technical assistance for governments in 3 cities, in Sao Paulo, Bogota, and Addis Ababa, and we'll be taking on 2 new cities next year. And we're working in a variety of ways to help look at policy and guidance, both impediments that exist and how do we help support new ways to be able to apply these strategies within the bones of the legislation and the policies that shape the cities. We're doing a lot of capacity building and training in these cities, both with academics and local technical staff, community workshops and trainings to help try and support and garner input for long-term visions of transformations of safe and sustainable streets at a neighborhood scale. And we're not waiting, we're going out and taking immediate action. We're doing interim street transformations and collecting the metrics. This was a 1-day pop-up plaza we did about 2 weeks ago in Bogota, where we transformed a car park into a public space. And examples like this in Addis Ababa, where we took 50 people out and just with chalk and some planters, we transformed this space, where we took crossings that were 50 meters wide with a bit of chalk. We could show the city officials in a few hours what a better space could look like. Now we have a much safer environment, reduced risk for pedestrians, reduced exposure to moving vehicles by crossing distance at 9 and 6 meters. We added a huge amount of public space. We had lunch with 50 people in the middle of the intersection. So it's just a first step. We're going back in November to do this in proper paint, to actually then collect longer term metrics. The idea is then we can refine it, tweak it, test it, and then ultimately go out and pour the concrete to make these capital changes. And this is important in cities like Addis Ababa because 70% of the people walk. Only 4% of the people drive, yet all the investment is in streets for cars. Now, that really doesn't make a lot of sense when we look at striving for an equitable city. So it's fundamental that we help to shift these practices on the ground. So in 2014, has anyone here heard of Jeanette Sadik Khan? A couple of people? Okay. So Jeanette used to run the transportation agency in New York City under Michael Bloomberg. And in 2014, she launched the Global Designing Cities initiative that built off a lot of the incredible work that the organization NACTO does, our organization does, in the United States. And I want to point out this green book here because this was really a huge transformation shift in the US context. We were discovering that the guidance, the policies that were shaping our streets in the United States were essentially resulting in highway-like environments in cities, right? A disastrous outcome for a place that's meant to be focused on people and livability and great businesses. So some of you may agree, sometimes changing policies at the national level can take quite a while. So Jeanette's not a light-hearted person. She wanted to say, all right, we're going to create our own guidelines. And so we did. We created the Urban Street Design Guidelines. They've since been endorsed and adopted by over 40 cities, 7 states, and now even the national DOT in the United States has endorsed and supported the principles in this document. So building off that, of course, that wasn't enough for Jeanette. She wanted to go global. So I was hired to develop the Global Street Design Guide. It's been a crazy ride, a crazy project. But it's really a document that we hope will support and complement the many resources that are already out there. And a document that we hope is technical enough and broad enough to not only inspire our leaders and inform our practitioners, but accessible enough to empower our communities to know what to ask for and demand of their streets. And the premise behind the whole document is taking the last 50 years where the car has been king and people have basically been forgotten about in the space of the street and flipping that on its head. Now, our pedestrians are the king. Our most vulnerable users, our people with disabilities, our children, our elderly people, become our new design vehicle and our new lens through which we design every street. We then prioritize sustainable transportation that moves more people in the same amount of space, and cycling, our most environmentally friendly ways of getting around. We need to make sure that our streets function for city services and moving goods so that our economy can keep moving. And when there's space, we allow space for private vehicles. Now, we haven't sat in our New York office and done this on our own. We created a network of people with over 40 countries and 70 cities represented. And what we're really doing is trying to ask what's possible. It's critical we get our new street designs right in new areas, but it's even more critical that we look at our existing context. Most of our cities are already built. So we have to go back and challenge how they are today and look at where there's opportunities to transform that space. And instead of taking a functional classification approach to streets where we get 3 categories and we basically say, okay, this is an arterial, or this is a connector, or this is a local street. That's not enough. Our cities are so diverse, our streets are so diverse. So instead, the Global Guide takes a new approach, a people and place approach, where we have to understand the context that every street runs through and the needs of the people that are using that. And we have to demand more of our streets, not only for moving cars and vehicles, but to create environments that proactively support healthy environments, that provide quality of life and livable neighborhoods for people, that support multimodal access for all users, environmental and economic sustainability, and that we do this in an equitable and fair way. There's 10 primary principles for the Global Guide, starting